Audio on demand from Vision Christian Media.
This is Bigger Questions with your host, Robert Martin.
Welcome to Bigger Questions. Today's big question, why bother with God? We're asking this question today to Julianne Laird. Julianne worked for many years on university campuses helping students consider Jesus. She now works as young adults pastor at All Saints Anglican Church in Greensborough, also with City to City, a church planting and leadership development organisation, and also a canon for church planting with the Anglican Diocese in Melbourne. And she joins me now. Julianne, welcome to Bigger Questions.
Thank you. Feels like I might not have much time to do that when you list all my jobs, but yeah.
Well, you do have a lot of jobs. Do you have enough days in the week to get them all done?
Like, it's busy, but it's sort of good in COVID times just to have something to do.
Sounds like you've got plenty to do. But Julianne, you've worked for many years with the university students and you now work as a young adults pastor as one of your many jobs. Yeah. But are young people really interested in spiritual things at all?
Yeah, like there definitely are some people who are not, but it's always surprising to me how many people are. And yeah, and I sort of think that actually there is a real interest, a growing interest at the moment in terms of people thinking about, well, there's got to be something bigger to life than this. And I think it's more that people just don't know what to do with that. So, yeah, I definitely think there's a real interest.
Well, that's great. Well, that's what our topic is today, our big question today. And to kick off bigger questions, we like to ask some smaller questions just to get us thinking. Today, we're talking with Julianne Laird about why we should bother with God. So, Julianne, in today's smaller questions, I thought we'd test you on how much you know about bothering with God. Okay, there's two questions, both multiple choice. Question one, according to recent research by McCrindle, commissioned by the Centre for Public Christianity, what percentage of Australians believe that God exists? Okay, was it A, 17%, B, 37%, C, 57%, or D, 77% of Australians think God exists? So what are you going to go with?
Well, it's definitely at the higher end, so it could be C or D. And I'm leaning towards D, but might be C.
Well, it's actually B, unfortunately.
Really?
Well, because that's actually the percentage who believe that God exists, because there was actually about 45% who are unsure or thought that God possibly existed.
Right.
So maybe there was a categorization metric there, perhaps, that threw you a little bit. Although that answer was actually higher, though, than those who believed in ghosts, which was actually 32%. So that's interesting.
Gosh, interesting.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
Well, sorry, but maybe that was a little bit misleading, Julie. I'm sorry about that. But that was
the people who...
It wasn't including the people who sort of said, I'm not sure, or maybe. So if you include that, then it's definitely a much larger percentage.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. We'll see if we can get you to pass. Question 2. Okay. According to Urban Dictionary, what is a God botherer? Is it A, someone who thinks a lot about God? Is it B, an overzealous Christian? Is it C, someone who prays excessively to God? Or D, a person who knocks on your door at an ungodly hour on Sunday morning in an effort to convert you to the worship of his or her faith? So according to Urban Dictionary, what is a God botherer?
Interesting. It's probably D, but...
It is.
I got one right.
We'll go with that. Why don't we just go with that? It probably is D because it actually is D. The answer is D. So, Julianne, there's no bothering you, but you got one of our two smaller questions right. You passed, and if we had a live audience here today, they would give you a great round of applause. So why should we consider then bothering with God? A minority of Australians believe he exists, although a lot of people are just not sure.
Yeah.
And people who do believe he exists are often pejoratively labelled as God botherers. So why should we consider this question?
Could I ask a question back in that? Well,
sure.
Why not?
Well, a lot of people just don't see the relevance of God in the world today. That he's invisible and he's caused a lot of harm in the world, and so maybe life can just go well without him.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people do think that, although surprisingly, when I meet people who don't really believe in God, when I ask why, often it started off with them praying to God when they were little and God didn't answer their prayer, and so now they don't believe.
Right.
And so, yeah, and I think that leads down a trajectory to then thinking, okay, I won't believe, and what does that look like? I think we do have a longing for something else or something bigger. And I don't know if you've read much or heard much about C.S. Lewis.
So C.S. Lewis, he wrote the Narnia Chronicles, The Lion, Witch and the Wardrobe, one of the best-selling children's novels of all time. Yeah, so he wrote those. Yeah, but how does he help?
Yeah, one of the things that he talks about, he's written extensively, he talks about how there are some things in this world that we just can't get enough of. And one of them is our sort of longing and search for beautiful things. And I think there are some things in this world that we just can't get enough of. And I think that points us towards something bigger, and potentially I think it's heaven. And yeah, we often have a drab view of the eternal life. But when Jesus was actually here, he did things like when he turned water into wine, the people who drank the wine said it was the best wine they've ever tasted. Mm. And I think we just have this longing for something bigger and better, and we're always striving for that. And I just think knowing God gives that.
But you've just talked about something bigger there, but why does it have to be sort of a personal God? Like, what is it worth clarifying what we mean by sort of God or this higher power or this something bigger?
Well, I think it's easy for Christians actually to work out what God is like because of Jesus. I don't know, there's a video series going around at the moment called The Chosen, and it's so fascinating to watch because it just depicts the life of Jesus. And he's the sort of guy that if he came into a party, you'd just go, oh, I want to get to know this guy. There's something that drawing you to him. And yeah, I think in terms of what I mean about God, and I think there are lots of descriptions, but that's what I think of. I just think of, wow, this is a person I really want to get to know. And Jesus is sort of the way that you can get to know him.
Right, so you say Jesus is one of the ways to get to know who God is.
Yeah.
So then given that there's a lot of people who don't believe in God, but there's also a lot of people who sort of sit in the middle and not really sure.
Yeah.
What should those people be thinking, or how can they think about this question?
Yeah, I think one of the ways is what he's revealed about himself. And so, like I would say the Bible is a way of getting to know God. I would say that Jesus, him coming, is a way that we get to know God. And I guess if you look at it the other way around, like if you were God, how would you reveal yourself to ordinary sort of people? And I think that's a really interesting thought. Okay, if God is trying to reach out to you and he wants you to get to know him, how would he do that? I remember talking to a guy at uni who was just bringing up all these questions against God. And I said, well, what would it take for you to believe in God? And he said, well, if God came down and spoke to me or came to this world. And I said, well, he did. And people still didn't believe that. So it might not be enough for you. It might be just you've decided, I don't want to believe. And if God did come to you and introduce himself to you, would you believe anyway?
And you say that that's where he comes down in the person of Jesus. That's Jesus has come down as God in that.
Yeah.
So you've just mentioned some of the people now, but you have spoken with lots of people about God, particularly young people. And the question of God doesn't seem to disappear, even though there is a rising tide of secularism in our country. So what do you think makes people contemplate this big question?
Yeah, I think when people actually take a bit of a moment to think about, well, what is the point to life? And I think I would say people have a gut feeling, like when you're on a plane or if you're looking out over a mountain, you just realize how small and insignificant we are as human beings. And so where did we come from, I guess? And in fact, I remember hearing at the Worldwide Atheist Conference held in Melbourne, and they said that if you're looking out over a landscape and you have this feeling that there's something bigger, just squash it. And I just went, oh, that's a bit sad in terms of, actually, I think we do have that innate sort of thing. And we long for things like a bigger purpose and meaning and we need hope. And, I just think knowing God makes sense, I guess. And there's something really awesome about knowing God in that, someone who's there all the time. I actually think it's quite beautiful.
You just mentioned the question of meaning there, but many non-believers can find meaning. I mean, there was a book published called A Better Life, where 100 atheists wrote and shared about the joy and meaning that they have experienced without God. So can't you find meaning without God?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think you can definitely find meaning. And there are some great things to really enjoy in our life, like my family. I love my family most of the time. But you need meaning outside of that, surely, because otherwise I'd smother my children, which they would not love at all. Or travel, for instance. I love travel, but surely you want meaning outside of that. And I think lockdown's taught us that, man. What do we do with life without travel? And I think we have lots of things that we can enjoy and that do provide us meaning, but I just think it keeps on pointing you outwards in terms of that can't be your only focus.
So what else do people say when you talk to lots of young people about contemplating the big questions? What other yearnings do you think that people then have or face?
Well, I think they've watched the generations ahead of them put their life and effort into work, into being successful, and they still see like their parents not that happy. And I think a lot of young people have realised actually these aren't the things anymore that you tick the boxes, getting your own home, all that sort of stuff, are the things that are going to make you happy.
Really? Do young people really feel like they're that perceptive? They're not just chasing after the same things that generation before them chased?
No, I don't think so at all. I think they've definitely looked at the generation before them and just gone, that's not worth it in terms of how you've ended up living your life. And I think that's been a good thing in terms of we're always looking at the generation ahead of us going, that's not how I want to live my life. Yeah. And circumstances change as well. Like it's just so hard for a young person to be able to even buy a house. And, well, if it's so hard, is that really what our life's all about, if we've got to bust your guts to try and do that?
So what do they conclude as they reflect on these bigger questions, so to speak?
I think our society really puts a lot of emphasis on pleasure or fun. And, I think we end up putting a lot of emphasis on pursuing pleasurable things. And you see that with young people in terms of experiences. They want to have experience. In fact, my son just for his birthday yesterday got given a jump out of an aeroplane. Because with a parachute, I assume. Right. Yeah. So it's not
and
he goes, I just want to do it once. And I'm going, yeah, that's great. And we have this pleasure pain paradigm. So we look for pleasure and we try and avoid pain. The problem, I think, is when it doesn't match up, when our life isn't all fun and isn't all pleasure. And in fact, COVID has definitely helped us have to think about, well, what is our life about? What's worth getting out of bed for when there is just your walk for the day is the only thing that you look forward to.
So how does that prompt us to think about things like God, though?
Well, I think the question is, well, what is our life all about? And one of the things that Jesus says is he said that there are two really important things in life. And one of them is to love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and to love others. And I think it's been an interesting thing, not having sort of a heap of things to do and realizing that actually when you look outside yourself, that actually that's when we do well, I think, as a human being. And I think that Jesus is onto something in that he's saying actually loving God with all our heart, soul, and mind is just looking out beyond ourselves, and to then thinking and looking out for other people is just good for us. And I think people are starting to work out these sorts of things, even contemplation and being thoughtful. These are all just things that Jesus actually, he wants us to live by. And it's sort of like this is the way we're made to be. And when you're trying to flourish as a human being, actually, I think looking at the way that God has made us and wired us actually really works and helps us in terms of thinking outside ourselves.
Yeah. So you're saying that there's something about we're almost wired for something bigger, so to speak. And so hence it makes sense if we wanted to pursue God because it actually connects with some of our deepest longings.
Yeah. Yeah.
So why do you bother with God?
Yeah. Well, I guess I've grown up in this way in terms of knowing God. I actually couldn't imagine anything else now. I think the thing that keeps me going is it actually puts things in the right perspective, I think. Right. So it keeps me looking outside of myself. It shifts how I see others because God really loves other people too. It helps me to know who I am in that it's a realistic picture of who I am because God actually knows me, so I can't hide in terms of who I am. But actually he keeps on forgiving me and he keeps on loving me. So there's just this goodness about that. And in fact, I think being married for me has been a little glimpse of that in that I'm married to someone who's incredibly accepting and loving, and I flourish as a person in that environment. And I think that's what it's been for me with God is I feel like I've just flourished as a person because of just having a God who just loves me so much and knows me.
But some would say that having a relationship with God is like having an imaginary friend for adults. Like, how do you respond to that?
Yeah, I sometimes listen to myself and go, man, like if you just had no idea about God, you would think that. Like I think there is something on a spiritual level that some people just don't understand at this point.
Yeah, yeah. But for you, God's not just imaginary. Like you're actually connecting with something bigger than yourself. That's kind of the reality of God underneath that you're connecting to.
Yeah, and it's based on truth. It's a weird word to use, truth, but it's based on a God who revealed himself to us, and we actually can know God and be in a relationship with him.
Well, some of these ideas are raised by the Apostle Paul in the New Testament letter of Philippians, where he writes in chapter 4, in verse 8 and 9, where he says, "Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put into practice, and the God of peace will be with you." So it's interesting that he does talk about the first thing he's this list of virtues that he highlights here. He does actually talk about, as you've just said, truth. He says whatever is true. So truth is obviously important for you as you in your quest for understanding who God is.
Well, you don't want to believe a lie. So what's the opposite to true? And
yes.
You don't want to believe a lie. I think there's ways of sort of knowing what is true. And as I've said, basically Jesus helps us know that God is a reality. But also I think people just have experiences of God. We had a young woman become a Christian recently, and she kept on saying to all of her friends, she kept on saying coming to church and actually reading the Bible she had quite a lot of mental health issues, and she was just saying, this is the only time that I actually feel some sort of peace, because it's a time where you can actually give your worries and your concerns to God. Now, that's true for her. It might not be true for others, but she's actually working out from her experience that actually she can trust God and that she can actually give her things. It's not all based, and her whole life isn't revolved around her and trying to fix her problems. Actually, she knows someone that can help her, that she can give her worries to, and actually it gives her real peace.
So that connects with what you were saying earlier about finding meaning outside of yourself. This is where that, in many respects, becomes liberating, because if you have challenges internally, then actually you have something external at which you can rely on and trust.
Yeah. Yep. I agree.
This passage also highlights a number of virtues. You've just mentioned truth, but whatever is noble, whatever is right, pure, lovely, and admirable. So do you all connect these with the quest for understanding God?
There's so many things that we could do that aren't noble, if that makes sense. And it's interesting getting older. You can look back on some of your life and go, wow, I could have pursued this in not a great way. And what is it that stops you from keeping on going further and further down a path that is less and less noble or debaucherous or and I often thank God in terms of actually he keeps on wanting me to do what is right, do what is pure, and whatever is lovely. And there is something lovely about a relationship with God. I remember I actually read this passage out at my grandmother's funeral, and I started crying because that described her in terms of she just loved God with all her heart, and she was a really beautiful person because she was able to look outside of herself, and as this passage says, and to have real peace with God, and you could see that coming through.
So can you find truth, whatever is noble, pure, what is lovely, without God though?
Yeah, and I think I want to keep on saying yes. Yes, you can. And this often comes out in terms of morality. But I guess the question is, in terms of morality, like how do you work out what is moral? And really it becomes hard to get a consensus to what that is, because the problem is we're actually all just human beings, and none of us have really lived long term with the implications of our actions and the decisions we make. So who becomes the people who we take our morality from? Is it the loudest people, the people who have the most power, the people who make decisions? And what's their highest priority in terms of morality? Is it money? And I think this whole COVID situation has been interesting in terms of working out what is our highest priority in terms of how we're making the decisions we're making. And so I think the problem for us is, in terms of morality, is that we can't actually extricate ourselves out of the decisions that we do end up making and perhaps enforcing on others. And we just are selfish, I think, in some ways, in terms of how we go about living our lives. And I think it's then just hard to work out what the moral sort of right sense of this is. There was an interview with Bono from U2, and he was just saying that actually there is something about karma in the way that this world operates, so that if you put in good will come back to you, and if you put in bad, it doesn't always work like that. But he said, there's this underlying sort of way that we do view the world. And he said the really surprising thing about Jesus is that when he comes into the world, he breaks that pattern. And basically he loves you whether you deserve it or not, and whether you're doing good things or not. It's not based on that in terms of our good and our bad. And it shifts religion actually from being about a moral-based thing actually to being about a graciousness and a God who breaks into this morality, I guess, the good and the bad, and we just get to see Jesus in that.
So there is a sense in which you can pursue the noble, the right, the pure, the lovely without God, but it's limited. There gets to a point at which that will kind of break, because we are limited, and if we're only connected to sort of humans, you need something beyond us to break that, and that's what you say comes in Jesus.
Yeah.
So what difference has bothering with God made for you?
For me, I've known a God who's reached out to me and who's wanted to be in a relationship with me, and I've embraced that. And it is a pretty lovely thing in terms of being known and loved and belonging with God.
And have you seen God change others that you've spoken with?
I run Alpha online pretty regularly, and it's just a great way of helping people work out, well, who is this God, and where do I sit with him? And recently there was a guy who came along, and he'd been in and out of prison for ages, and he kept on having this dream about the number 3. And so he went to the chaplain at the prison and just said, what's the number 3 mean? And the chaplain goes, the Trinity is pretty important. And so the chaplain described the Trinity, and just in terms of what each person did in that. So who God was in terms of the creator of the world, and Jesus was in terms of coming as a human and actually dying for us because we had a broken relationship with God, and he allows us to have a good relationship, and the Spirit who keeps on working in us and changing us and growing us. And he basically became a Christian, and he changed so much that when he came out of prison, his wife just said, that's what I want as well. Like, if this has been transformational to you. And it was just amazing each week. It's like they just were hungry to know more. And each week they just were changing right in front of your eyes, both of them, in terms of their love for God and their knowledge of God, I guess. And it was just wonderful to see.
So, Julianne, why bother with God?
Well, if there is a God out there, and he wants you to know him and love him, and he's longing for that, so he's reaching out towards you. Well, my question is, what's stopping you? Why wouldn't you want that? And, I think it's totally worth it to get to know him.
Well, let me leave you with some of the Bible's answer to the big question, why bother with God, from Philippians 4, 8 and 9. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. I look forward to you joining us next time for Bigger Questions. Thanks very much to our guest today, Julianne Laird.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
Enjoy Bigger Questions? You can help us keep asking them for as little as $1 a podcast. Support the show. Go to patreon.com/biggerquestions.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.